Spirit, be my wisdom, be my words, lift me up. Spirit, grow inside me, keep me yours, help me love.
Dad lived in New Mexico in Santa Fe. My mom was in Houston, and I had a great stepmother. But I'd always been close to her. But in about 1968, during the whole kind of hippie revolution, definitely got caught up in that, and I lived in a little town in Texas where it wasn't working real well to be that there. And so I thought, gee, I'll move to Santa Fe. I'd visited here every summer to be with my dad and stepmom. I thought, I'll just move there. They're kind of hippies, and it'll be pretty easy to live the lifestyle I want. And so we made that plan out of 9th grade. And when I got to Santa Fe, I arrived and my stepmom was having a full-blown revival in her life, unbeknownst to me. And I guess what had happened was she'd had a secret all her life. She hadn't told anybody, including my dad. And the secret was that as a young girl, she'd received the Lord and been very excited about her walk with the Lord and sang in church, had a beautiful voice. But then as life went on, she had just drifted away from the Lord. And part of that was meeting my dad. He had a very wild lifestyle. But in Santa Fe, she met a missionary from a little Baptist church that really reintroduced her to the Lord. So I arrived, and that was happening, much to my horror, because she wanted me to go to church all the time and pray and be part of it, and that was not what I was expecting at all. But she was a woman of prayer, and she prayed for me and for my dad. We both ended up getting saved really quickly during that summertime. And with my dad, he had an intensity that he always had with everything else, and he was so excited about the Lord. And I was a little more timid about it, but still really wanting to walk in that. And so, maybe as a side note, this is one thing I like to always tell people, especially, this was back in the 60s, it wasn't as common to have a step-parent. They were fewer and far between, but nowadays, almost everybody seems to have one, and I think sometimes step-parents feel insignificant in the other children's lives. And it was really my stepmother that loved me and my sister and prayed for us to be saved. Through that, my mother was, my husband's parents were, his family. It really ignited a fire throughout our family and friends, and it was really all because of my stepmom and her love for God and for us and prayer. So I think step-parents nowadays need to recognize they serve a vital role in children's lives, and even though it might seem like a step-family, so to speak, they bring it together. So as we started serving the Lord, my dad noticed in me, I started school here, Santa Fe High, and really picked up some of the same types of friends at that time that I had had before. And as my dad noticed in me and my friends, the need for more of the Lord and a greater understanding, and his heart really became for that lost generation he felt. And at that time, he had just bought a house across from La Posada on a street called Faithway Street. At the very end of the street, it's still there. And it was empty at the time. He wasn't sure what to do with it. And during that time, my soon-to-be husband was in the Army, got out of the Army and came to Santa Fe. And we were going to get married, and my dad said he would let us live in that house on one condition, that it would be open to anybody, anytime that wanted to stay there, and that we would have Bible study 7 nights a week and be available. And so we agreed to that. And within just a few weeks after being married, people started, I don't know how word gets out, but we worked downtown, we walked to work, and when we come home, there'd be people all over our porch looking for a place to stay. And we'd let them in, we'd have the greatest time. It was a huge demographic of people, some teenagers, some businessmen, older ladies, younger ladies, an amazing group of people, but they all came with a hunger. We didn't have any furniture in the house, and no pillows, no anything for people, but they just came and slept on the floor. And my dad would come over every night and share the word with them, and people were just getting saved. It really was no effort. The Holy Spirit was really directing it. God was just causing a harvest of the people that had been disillusioned, by the whole hippie revolution. And finding the Lord there, and there was such a simplicity of people just believing if the Bible said it or God said it, it had to be true, and it would happen, that He would provide their food, and He would provide for them a place. And during that time, you think about it, for my husband, the minimum wage was $2 an hour, and that's what he made. He brought home $80 a week. And there was never a night we didn't have enough food to feed 6 or 8 or 10 people. We gave them breakfast in the morning. Don Compton had somehow connected with a donut shop that gave him day-old donuts, and he would bring those over to us several mornings a week. And it was just an amazing time of seeing people come in without any effort at all and just receiving the Lord. There was a great move at that time, and you barely start to talk to people, and they just fall into wanting to believe that. We had also at the same time downtown Santa Fe Village on Don Gaspar. It was like a kind of a vintage looking shopping mall. And I think that my stepmother opened a Christian bookstore there. I think it was the first Christian bookstore ever in Santa Fe. And so of course everybody would meet down there. We had a little restaurant, people would come there. We had written on the menu, you could get your meal with a prayer or without, and we would pray over people's food with them. And it was just a constant time of revival, getting together, breaking bread, enjoying the fellowship of one another, and just growing in the Lord and seeing the hand of God move in our lives and the lives of people around us. And it seemed like the age barrier, began to break down. There were old and young alike, and we continued in that for several years. We eventually, after 2 or 3 years, sold that house, and so that wasn't there anymore for people to come to, but we still had the Santa Fe Village, and we began to meet in people's homes and go from house to house and do home fellowships at that time. And then during that time, actually, we'd become anti-church, established church. That wasn't what we wanted to do at all. But in about 1980 or 81, one of our daughters met another girl in school that went to a church. And our daughter started bugging us to go to the church, which we eventually did. And in that church was really, there's so many people that had come out of that same movement that had banded together and formed the church. And we just found a really great place of fellowship and home there, and begin to kind of knit ourselves to people there and grow in the faith there. Went from house to house again, and I think because people had come out of that culture of communal living and being together, they continued on with that in the church, and it was a true place of growth. I'd have to say I had most of my spiritual growth during that time, meeting with other women and the pastor. We always had these pastors over us that were super straight looking guys, had not come out of that movement, and yet they had the huge impact on all of us. We would go out to the rivers and baptize people, whether it was winter or summer. If somebody wanted to be baptized, we did it that day. That was always a great time. As we began to grow in that church and take on more responsibility and take on different roles of leadership and serving the community, and just continued to grow in that during that time.
Tell us a little bit about some of the people who were your early friends in Capital Christian.
Oh gosh. Well, let's see. Don and Debbie Aker were really the first couple that reached out to us that first Sunday at church and invited us to their home, and that was like in 1981. We still have a close friendship with them. Jim and Pat Noble often prayed with us. We'd have so many questions once we got into the church that we'd never thought of before. Oh, Terry and Sheila Northway, Hank and Judy Nowers. So many. I don't want to leave anybody out, but the church was so big then. Ole, Steve Hodges, and they were, Ole really, along with some others, really taught us how to worship and the importance of worship. She was so instrumental in that, and still at the church even now. I just see her as just a person of honor, that she really brought worship to the church in a way that we hadn't experienced before. I'm so grateful for that. So many people kind of came and went over the years throughout the church, that we still had that kind of traveling, rambling mentality. A lot of people didn't want to put down roots and would keep moving from place to place and experiencing things. Of course, Ed Weiser at the time was the pastor, Ed and Peggy Weiser. I gotta say, I really felt sorry for him, because after Sunday, almost every Monday morning, Ron and I would be in his office with questions, and he'd give us a book, and we'd take that book home and read it, and then the next Monday, same thing. Finally, after about, maybe 6 or 8 weeks of that, I can remember so clear, Ed looked at us across the desk, and he said, "You know what, you guys are just gonna have to decide if you wanna be here or not," because we questioned everything, and he said, "I can't change what the Bible says for you to make you more comfortable, and you have to decide if this is what you really want." And that was a good word, because it did put us in a place where we had to decide. And we decided, yes, this is really what we're going to do. We're going to apply ourselves to learning the Word and submitting to God and to the leaders over us and trusting them. And it was a great time of learning and growing in the Lord. He had great patience, because there were a lot of us like that. I don't think I was the only one that was asking a lot of questions, and really grateful for them, their service to the church. Not sure exactly how long they had been there, but...
Well, this was part of the culture of that day. Comment on that spirit of, especially the hippie young people were looking for something. What was it?
Well, I think in some ways, they were disillusioned by what the country, the parents, the generation before them had handed them. And I wasn't that old during the hippie time. I was, a teenager still, pretty rebellious teenager, but, I never lived in a commune or anything like that. And yet there still was that mentality that, the generation before us was wrong, didn't know much. And just trying to find the answer of really truth and reality. I think anytime a generation is seeking, it's a good time. They might be seeking something different than they think, but once you open yourself up to really wanting something different, I think it opens the door for God to come in and to really show you truth. Because there was the whole thing, love. Everybody wanted love and freedom, and that's what God is about, love and freedom. And peace, the peace sign was a big deal. And of course, God is peace. Christ gives us peace in all things. And so the very things I think we and myself or others were seeking for was really found in God. But there was, kind of a mentality on our own to avoid that, because that's what our parents had was religion. And we didn't really want religion. We wanted something a little more real. And I think that's what happened, as people started entering into relationship with God and really giving yourself over to what He said, and time in prayer. And I just think as He started changing your heart, all the things that we were longing for and wanted were already there. And He was giving to us. And forgiveness and understanding, you don't have to live with shame or even regrets, that, God is able to cover that. And it was a great time, during that movement. I think it's continued for many of us in different levels. There's times where, over since the 80s that it's been more difficult times, and newer generations coming in, Generation X, and now millennials, they call them. And each generation, though, I think essentially is seeking for the same thing, just with different words and attitudes, and God is still the same.
What were some of the things in the church that turned you off and made you feel like that wasn't really where you wanted to go?
I think a lot of it was maybe more my perception of the church than the reality of the church. As a young girl, I had been brought up for a short time till I was about 7 in the Catholic Church. But there was just the kind of awe and respect that you had for God when you entered into those churches were it's just overwhelming to a child to see that. And then when my father and mother separated, we had quit going to church, but then we had a neighbor that started taking us to a Methodist church. And I actually liked that a lot. We were in the choir, and I couldn't sing, but they let me stay, and it was all a good time. And then after that, I think just the idea of religion, conformity, rules, we didn't want any rules. It was too binding on us, and that's how we perceived God and religion to be. Rules, fear, condemnation, kind of keeping us in a tight circle instead of being able to, expand who we were. And especially in Santa Fe, so many people came here with creativity, music and art, and really wanted to express that, and ideas. And I think it was just a misperception of God, that you couldn't do that and be a Christian or a believer at the same time. So we avoided it for a while.
Yeah. Very good. So, what are some of the things that you remember going on during the period in the Faithway House that stand out in your mind?
Wow. Well, I would say that was from, for me, at the actual house from like 1970 to 1973. There's so many things. It was just such almost a surreal time, and met so many people, and yet there was still some common thread there that, you'd make friends with people that in normal life you never even probably say hi to because they just didn't fit your mold of who fit into your friendship circle, and yet, it didn't matter then at that time. And complete strangers, like I said, every night would be on our porch, and yet we would embrace them like they were family and knew them and welcome them in the house. We'd see people get healed. We'd see people just believe for food, and then, something supernatural would happen. They just find, it might be something even some people would think is silly, find like a whole apple on a windowsill. And, they would take it and eat it. Maybe nowadays you wouldn't, I don't know, or find a sandwich somewhere that looked like it hadn't been touched, and if they were hungry. And, there was still that kind of hippie roaming kind of thing in the seeking, and yet you would see some people come in and get really just on fire, and then you'd never see them again. Other people would kind of be more, listening and waiting. And we had a lot of people from Santa Fe. That was the other thing. My dad would give me the van, and my job was to go, back then everything happened at the plaza, and drive around the plaza, and you just kind of yell Bible study, and people just run and get in the van. I don't know if you could do that today, and this would be like on a Friday night when there was other stuff going on. So my job was to fill up the van, my husband's and myself, and bring them back to the house. And, we'd all visit. Many of those people are still in town today, and, get saved. They'd go through different trials in life. We saw people get married and have children, and, a lot of times you didn't know what happened to them, in the future, and yet you knew something was happening, something that you couldn't control, that you couldn't stop it and you couldn't make it happen, that it was just happening. And really, kind of my thought was you just jumped in the flow and went with it and didn't try to control it, because if you did that, you would ruin it and just kind of enjoy it. And, I was so young then that I didn't really have another point of reference to compare it to like I do now. And so I just thought it was always going to be that way. That's how it always was. This is Christianity right here at its finest. And yet, there was a time when that kind of waned. And, I believe God does have times and seasons. And then, kind of real faith, I would say, kicks in, and you're walking more by faith than by experience at that point. And still believing. I see so many you know, I mentioned like Don Compton and the Nobles and Acres and different ones that they just remained so faithful. It's been 45 years, you know, since then. That's a long time.
Give us your comments. We want to know what you think. So drop one in the comment section below. And if you like this video, please like and subscribe. And until next time, God bless.